Superman, the movie that started it all, superhero movie started it all in 1978. Christopher Reeves. I have tales to tell you, the magic back in that period. I went back to rewatch and revisited this last night. This is obviously a 4K upgraded version. It's got a Dolby Atmos soundtrack, but I think you're going to find this very intriguing. I'm going to tell you why it was impactful back in the 70s, why it's impactful today, and why it's still magical. So this is Norb with Silver Aged. So here's what you probably don't know a lot of. It actually was not the highest grossing movie back in 78. Grease was, with Travolta. And that summer was also National Lampoon's Animal House. So it was a great year. This came out December. And there were a lot of challenges that came up front with actually trying to cast this thing. Eventually it came to be really well done, but there were challenges. They offered the Superman role out to people like Robert Redford. Sly Stallone was interested, for example, but they decided they didn't feel those were the right fit. They wanted to have somebody that was more small townish looking, less worldly. So they decided to go a different direction. But they also knew to justify the budget, which turned out to be around $55 million, the most expensive movie at that point in time. Another fact for you. They needed some stars. So they set their target on a couple of them. Marlon Brando, Gene Hackman, for example. Gene Hackman actually signed first and then said, no, I don't think I want to do this. But then when Marlon Brando got signed as Jor-El, Hackman goes, you always wanted the chance to work with Brando. So he said, okay, I'm on. So interesting thing about Marlon Brando at that point in time, he got the highest amount of salary and residuals ever at that point, of $3.7 million in 1978, plus 11.75 points of the gross profit the movie made. Now, interestingly, also, Gene Hackman, he got $2 million. Gene Hackman didn't make $2 million again until later on. For the Western, he got the Academy Award in some other movies. Those were to like another 20 years later. This is how much they desperately wanted to get people involved in this. And they went and looked around and they decided to cast an unknown, basically, who had very little acting experience outside of like Broadway and maybe some TV commercials. And I forgot, Christopher Reeves was also in a soap opera. Almost forgot about that. He was going to Juilliard, and he had some good teachers in that. So they selected him. They liked the way he had to build himself up and get on this to get into the movie shape because he was relatively skinny. And then if you take a look at the movie, the initial credits, it was great. They showed homage to 1938, the original comic book. I don't have a copy of that, which I did, but which I had just a facsimile page to show you back in 1938. And that's really when the Depression was still closing down. And they talk about Daily Planet, and then things go forward. And then the movie opens up also with this Star Wars type of scripts and lettering and that kind of stuff. And I always thought it was sort of done by the guys at George Lucas's labs, but I found out afterwards it was another production company who did those. So they have a little bit different look and feel. Definitely added class. And of course, John Williams did the script, the music on this. So that was really pretty awesome. But Marlon Brando, he was a pain in the butt to work with. His contract, besides being the highest, it said he didn't have to learn any of the lines. and he only had to be there for 2 weeks of production. And if it went more than 2 weeks, he got another $1 million per day. But they really needed his star power name on this. And Brando, he really did not even understand who Jor-El was. He at first wanted him to portray him as a bagel. Then he also wanted him to be portrayed as a green suitcase. And eventually they convinced him, no, that doesn't make any sense. Now, one of the things Brando did do that's become a legacy with Superman moving forward on the small screen, big screen, and even in the comic books is the S on his chest. When they had, and this is when they were on Krypton and they're talking, and there are those white things, they had an emblem. The emblem, I don't know what the emblem was before, but they decided, Brando goes, well, if Reeves has got an S on his chest, I want an S on my chest. So it didn't mean anything at that point other than sort of became a family crest at that point. And, at that point in time, there was thoughts that Martha Kent was the one who designed the original S on Superman's outfit. So going forward, you can have that dialogue, who you thought was first. I'd like to hear your comments on that as well, please. But anyway, he's the one that's really been Brando is one responsible for the S to be embedded as to being a symbol of the L house, Jor-El, Kal-El, etc. So that's a nice little interesting fact for you. And of course, Gene Hackman, the way he played Lex Luthor, I think that was impacted also at that point in time by Batman on TV. And the comic books got a little comedic at times. So they portrayed Luthor as not as an arch villain, but a villain. It could be, he had the tendencies to be a nasty villain, but in this, as we know, he was more of a real estate guy, and he was looking way just get quick ways to get rich. He didn't care how many millions of people he killed. Sort of like Luthor doesn't really care, but that Luthor, all he cared about was money, which I think today's Luthors have evolved into power and ego, taking over the world subtly, directly, and having a pure hatred for Superman. But back here, it wasn't a hatred for Superman in this movie. It was more, you're my way, Superman. Oh, you're here? Well, I didn't know who you, all of a sudden you came up the same day, but I want the plan to cause an earthquake to wipe out part of California. So I can have beachfront property I just bought in Vegas. So that was how that came about. I mean, interesting, a very interesting kind of character. He went on, started was in the second movie. We can talk about that a little. Now there's another video, but that was also interesting. As Brando also was interesting. Brando got kind of written out of the second movie, even though he's contractually in there. They cut all the scenes out because Brando really wanted more money and some other creative latitudes, and they separated. And the second movie is a whole different story we'll get into another day. So the magic of Superman, embracing not only what his real dad told him, Jor-El, through his learning experience at the Fortress of Solitude, but really embracing the moral aspects he picked up from his dad on Earth. And that moral aspect caused him to spin the Earth backwards, reverse time, save Lois, and be a greater hero that we all grew and respected and loved. And we were so engaged in that movie. The magic in that time was awesome. Now, going forward, this has obviously impacted all the superhero movies going forward. And it laid the groundwork, although Batman took us in a right-hand turn and made things more violent, where Superman was more happy, Boy Scoutish, the American way. But that started drifting a little bit. And I think right now what's happened in the current version that James Gunn's coming out with, he's done a couple of things. He's taken Superman years after he's been introduced, like the first movie he had done, and put him in the environment now that he's being morally challenged. Am I making the right decisions for everybody? I think that's kind of a nice impact connection coming back, bringing that back to some realities of the real world at this point. Also, how Lex Luthor despises, hates Superman, doesn't like the press. He gets in his way. That's also interesting. And we also, like I said earlier, they have embraced bringing in an Otis and a Miss Tessmacher as well. And then we also, from the original movie in 78, we have a Perry White, we have a Jimmy Olsen, we have other associated characters like that. They're coming forward. So they're embracing that. But the difference also is now we're not telling an origin story how Superman got to where he was, what planet he came from, where his parents were from, and how he first gets introduced to the world. They need more villains. That's what James Gunn's bringing into this. They need more heroes. I think they are using this as an offshoot to develop into a Justice League movie eventually. And James Gunn's interconnecting everything that is out there on TV land since he's taken over, saying everything is canon moving forward. So he's taking pieces of canon from this movie, really embracing the love, the magic, the capabilities, the flying, the truth, the belief Superman's doing everything right, the love for Lois Lane, bringing that forward, giving Lois Lane more of a reporter's edge. All kudos. I think the impact is going to be even more direct, that Superman is going to be going through not only an issue where he's not as powerful as he was back then in 1978. They reduce his power set a little bit. Don't know if we're going to see any kryptonite like we did in 78's movie, but I think he's going to be more not always having the right answers at the right time. He's going to find when things he's done is not always right, and he has to build trust with the public, where back in the 78 movie, everybody loved him because he did everything right, saved everybody. So I'd like to hear some of your comments. Norb, Silver Age, please like and subscribe to our channel.